Welcome to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point Podcast. Our podcasts are designed to bring a conversational exploration of key topics that we believe will provide value and insight to those serving in the nonprofit sector. We will highlight new developments in the field, latest research, and things we're learning from our own clients that we can share.
I want to welcome everybody to this month's edition of the Calibration Point Podcast. Super excited to continue this journey with Senator John Crane, who we had on and already framed our approach to leadership. Senator Crane is also the founder and principal partner of JBC Leadership, as we talked about last time. And we are spending time now, just in the coming months as well, getting to unpack, go deeper as we framed in our last session, the why, the where, the who, and the how of your leadership as a leader. How do we move beyond the idea of just organizational leadership and realize that it first happens at the atomic level? And there's a lot of misnomers at the atomic level of understanding an individual's leadership. And last session, Senator Crane, we got to unpack this. It was a lot of fun. We set the table, and now, you and I are going to start to take one at a time for these sessions and really just share, okay, well, here's what this means now under the hood, and here are the simple application steps someone can take. So thank you for continuing this journey with me. I'm really excited about it.
You bet. I appreciate you having me back on. I always tell people it's nice enough to get the invitation once, but if you get invited back, it means hopefully you've said something of value, and I always appreciate that, especially in terms of talking about this topic that I am so passionate about, leadership. And the reason I'm so passionate is because, as we said in the first episode, leadership is so needed in our world today, and there's a lot of practitioners that are trying to figure it out. And leadership is a team sport. So there's many things that I learn from people, and hopefully some things that people can learn from us. And that's the way it should be. I appreciate the fact that you went back and kind of talked about this framework, and we've kind of labeled in some pretty simple terms, really, the why, the where, the who, and the how. And one of the things that you mentioned, and I would encourage your listeners, if they haven't, to go back and listen to that first conversation, because one of the comments that you said that I thought was so insightful and so valuable is the importance of seeing this as a framework, as something that isn't just for seasoned leaders. We kind of get to a certain point in our leadership journey, and if we're not careful, we can easily assume, well, I don't need to learn that. That's pretty simplistic, and go past some of the fundamentals, right? Vince Lombardi famously has this story about Vince where he was opening practice with the Green Bay Packers, and he holds up a football and he says, "Gentlemen, this is a football." And it seems overly simplistic, but his point was we have to start with the fundamentals. We have to keep revisiting the fundamentals if we're going to continue to build on them and find success. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to leadership. And so this is intended, this entire framework, and even this series that we're doing, Conversations, is intended to have a place where people can go back and kind of get recalibrated. Because as you pointed out, and I think, I know it's happened to me, it happens to leaders all the time. We start out on one path, and somewhere along the way, there's a slight deviation, right? Of maybe 1 degree even. It's not big at all. And it doesn't seem to be noticeable until we get farther out on that trajectory, and 1 degree deviation turns into us landing at a different spot than we had originally intended. So I love that. And to me, the very biggest part of this is understanding the why, right? If we were to say the what of leadership, leadership's about intentional influence, as we said in that opening conversation.
Right.
And that's key. That's understanding that leadership is a choice. It isn't just about leaders and non-leaders, and we'll visit some of that later. It's about leaders and potential leaders, that we all have a choice in terms of the direction we're going to go. But the biggest thing, and I think this is so important, is do we really understand why we are leading? Why are we doing it? What is the point? What is the purpose? I think all of us, even at a deeper existential question and place in our lives, is going, What is my purpose? I mean, Rick Warren wrote his famous bestseller, The Purpose-Driven Life. And he told a story in more recent years about having a young person come up to him and ask, hey, what's the purpose of life? This young person was too young to realize that he'd written this whole
You've written a book.
bestseller on it, right? And that's when Rick realized that this information is universal and needs to be revisited generation upon generation or passed down from one generation to the next, not just in terms of humanity, but also in terms of leadership, key leadership ideas. And so this existential question of purpose, I think, guides all of us. And that's the starting point, is trying to understand that. But then it translates into our leadership, I would say, as well.
Yeah, I think that's excellent, John. And let's take that into another step. And I want you to help me in the translation. So if I'm working with an organization, which we do a lot of organizational, like outcomes-driven strategic planning, and which is a little bit different than just the tactical kind of glorified business plan, which is a lot of strategic plans in the nonprofit sector end up. But we're really defining outcomes, change, and then obviously the vision, which is the ultimate destination. And one of the things that we do a lot of work on is helping organizations come back to perspective, especially in the social sector, of understanding that a vision can't be too ethereal. It still has to be measurable and put into context. And that doesn't mean that now it's something that I'm looking at in 3 years. It could still be a 50-year vision, but I have to somehow establish some sense of indicators that are going to tell me if I've moved the needle towards that vision and if I've ever come to a full destination within it. When I hear you talking about the why of leadership, what is my purpose and my calling as a leader, or I should say my purpose and calling, and then leadership is a piece of that, right? How do you help people when they're thinking about their why come to the understanding of the destination of their why and still being able to put their hands around it and not come up with something that's like so ethereal that it's just this big wishy-washy feel-good statement that as a leader they can't operate with, which we see at times?
That's a great question. And there's a phrase in the Christian world about people are so heavenly minded that they're no earthly good. Right? Like we're so big picture that we haven't actually got down into the day-to-day to really translate that into a meaningful application process. And so one of the things, and we kind of alluded to this in our first conversation, but it bears repeating, one of the concepts that I put to people is this idea of legacy-driven leadership. So imagine, for example, if you were at your own funeral, what would you want people to say about you? I tell people I attended my own funeral last year, and last year in 2024 was the year that I voluntarily stepped away from the Senate. I term limited myself. And so they hosted a very nice retirement ceremony on the floor of the Senate here in Indiana. And it felt like I was at my funeral. The way that it's set up is it's one of these where they offer a kind of a ceremonial resolution with all these nice things that are said on it, about you, Senator Crane was this and that. And then they open the floor and allow people to speak on the resolution. And so in my own case, for 40 minutes, colleagues and senators from both sides of the aisle got up in my presence and the presence of my family, and my mom was there and some other key people, and shared what they appreciated about me during my tenure in the Senate.
Wow.
It felt very humbling. It felt very somewhat overwhelming because there was a lot of nice things. Of course, that's how we approach those kinds of things. But it felt deeply satisfying because I had been very intentional when I came into the Senate to say, as I told my friend and colleague, who's our chaplain there, Matt Barnes, I said, I'm not here to be a senator. I'm here to be a catalyst for redemptive good in the political arena. Like that was my why for being in the Senate. I'm here to be a catalyst for redemptive good in this environment. And my side goal was to try to redeem the reputation of the politician if possible. And so I spent what became 8 years trying to be the best senator that I could be in terms of passing good legislation, being a good colleague, trying to be thoughtfully engaged in the issues of the day, trying to practice servant leadership, because it's all about customer service, right? The customer is the constituent and all that. And so did my very best, not perfect by any means, but I feel very satisfied with the job I did, to then be able to have that reflected at that retirement ceremony was very satisfying to me. And it just continued to confirm for me this idea of legacy-minded or legacy-focused, legacy-driven leadership.
Yeah.
And translate that outside of a state capital to life and say, okay, what is it that I would actually want people to say about me? Because every single day we're actually writing our eulogy. We're building a brand, we're building a reputation, and those are the kinds of things that are going to be reflected on the day that we finally do pass from this life to the next. So we start with the big picture. But then, to your point, the big picture in my mind then scales back to the day-to-day.
Right.
If I want to be seen, for example, as a servant leader, as a senator, then what are the day-to-day decisions I can make to serve the people around me? One of those is to incorporate in a very real and practical way this question that I say is the key to success and significance, and that is, how can I help you? If you ask that question and you continue to ask that question to the people around you, whether it's a colleague, if it's a boss, if it's a underling or a family member, how can I help you? And you just incorporate that into your life, guess what? You have opportunity to have significance, and you will never be lacking for success, because everybody's looking for somebody to join their team that's willing to help and do all the dirty work, right? So that's where that is ultimately guided by, I want to be the kind of person that people go, hey, John Crane was a kind-hearted servant leader. And it then was translated into me every day attempting to try to say, hey, how can I help you? As just one example.
Yeah.
But you've got to marry the two. Yeah.
You had a vehicle to drive your why, this idea of redemption in the political environment, and just, I mean, you being that kind of politician to create change, redemptive change. And then your servant leadership became one of your, obviously your means to drive that why. How, so you ask the legacy question, and I'm assuming then from that, spending some reflection time, depending on someone's faith or not faith worldview, how they might approach that, and coming to some sense of, like, this is what I feel my purpose and calling is about as a leader. And then how often do you encourage someone to gut check that why?
All the time, right?
Okay,
because I think that it's that regular recalibration. Now, you may gut check the why and land in the same place that you were the day before, and you can just kind of check the box and go, okay, good, I'm still doing what I've set out to do. But as we get older, as we get more mature, if we get, for people of faith, we get deeper in our spiritual walk and we begin to understand things a little bit better, or hopefully we've applied some habits in our life so that we're getting a little bit better at certain things, then life is dynamic. It's never static. And so I can speak into that dynamic element. There's real-time things happening that are going to speak into that dynamic element. So I've got to continue to have my plumb line and say, this is what I'm about. So my larger why, beyond the Senate, I articulate this way. And this kind of ties into the mission piece, which we'll get into in terms of the where at our next episode. But my why is, my purpose is to help people find and follow the good path to the truly good life. That's the big picture why. Now, what does that actually look like in the day-to-day? Well, it depends on what my roles are, right? So if I get a chance to speak in front of people, then how can I add some content in a thoughtful way that gets them to discover, for example, what's the definition of good? If you're a person of faith or not, we might have some overlap and there might be some other things that are different, but you still got to understand, okay, what what good do I want to bring into the world?
Yeah. And what does good mean, to your point?
Yeah, that's right. And I think I used this in our last conversation just briefly. If I'm a basketball coach, right? Like my job as the coach is to try to help young people learn the sport, try to help them learn teamwork, try to win games, right? And the ultimate goal in terms of that particular sport is to win the last game of the season. That's the goal. That's the championship game. But as a coach who is trying to help people find and follow the good life, the good path to the truly good life, the question becomes, but do I have a larger why? And my coaching season or my leadership role there is the context towards pursuing that larger why or that greater good. So, for example, even if we lose every game of the season, and yet every one of my players is a person of greater character and integrity, that's the win, right? Because my ultimate goal is to try to help people become the very best that God would want us to be. I don't want to have a losing season. I also want to win. I need to be competent in the things that I do, but I can tie the daily things that I do to my larger mission if I understand that larger mission and if I understand how to connect those dots. And it takes some work. Yep. It takes some work. I mean, I can rattle off, I want to help people find and follow the good path to the truly good life. And people might think I woke up this morning and had an epiphany in the shower and that just rolled out. That is years and years and years of really wrestling that thing through and trying to find my own purpose in life. And then figure out, okay, how does that fit with the things that I'm good at, the things that I'm passionate about, the calling that I feel in my life, and then translate that to, okay, it's Monday morning. Who are the people I'm going to interact with today? How do I live that out in the day-to-day?
With keeping the focus on the why.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Because that's what helps us determine whether or not, as you talk about that gut check kind of revisiting, recalibration, that's what helps us determine whether or not we're still on that track, or if we've deviated, we need to kind of recalibrate back to our why, or our why might change. I mean,
right.
When I was a kid, I wanted to be I grew up in the early 80s and Top Gun was the thing. And I wanted to be a fighter pilot like Tom Cruise, right? And I still wanted to serve in the military. I come from a military family, but I thought that was the thing, is I want to be a fighter pilot. Yeah. Well, then I got older. I got more mature. I realized that math and science weren't my strengths. And so flying a jet, supersonic, was not going to be a good outcome for me. And I began to discover what I actually was really put here on the planet to do.
Yeah.
And that's to try to help leaders get better at becoming their best.
Yeah, that's awesome. As a fun side note, when I was 8, my plan was I was going to buy a semi truck and take my family and drive cross country.
Exactly. The huge dreams of small minds.
That's right. Even had the truck picked out.
That's awesome. Hey, there's still time. You can still do that.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. I love this as a first step in unpacking. Go back to the why. Think about your legacy. Think about what is driving you, what that calling is. Gut check it periodically. Even with that process, assuming you can also gut check it through other individuals. And that's the beauty of your example of the retirement, having other people help you see, was my why understood and am I on track with it? I think a big takeaway from that, what I hear you saying too, is don't take for granted the why, and don't assume that it's on track. We have to be intentional about creating evaluation modes to be sure our why is on track.
Well, that's right. And one of the things that we alluded to in our first episode that really informs that is the only way we're going to know we're on track is if we are as clear as we can be about what our ultimate why is. So one of the questions becomes, well, how do I know what my why is? I think I know. I'm not sure if I know. And so one of the processes that we take people through is a little thought exercise. And sometimes we actually work this out on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, which is what we call follow the why. So if I were to ask you, okay, what do you really care about, or what do you want to do? And you say, well, I really care about X. And you go, okay, well, why? Why do you care about that? Well, because I really care about this over here. Okay, good. Why do you care about that? And you walk them, you just keep asking that childish question, why?
Yeah.
Until they get down to the core bedrock where it's like, we can't go any farther than that.
Right.
And let me give you one quick example. So years ago, I was speaking to some young leaders and began to pose this question of purpose and why and all that. And one of the questions that I ask people, because it's a passion question, is if you could do anything and you knew you wouldn't fail, what would you do and why? And so this little gal who was in high school, she says, well, I want to be a beautician. Okay. Why? Well, because I like to do people's hair. And okay, why? Well, because I like to, I like ladies to look nice. All right. Why?
Right.
Because I want them to feel good about themselves. Why? Because they're people of value. Why? And in her case, she was a Christian.
Yep.
Her bedrock was because they're human beings made in the image of God, and He loves them, and I want to love them too. And all of a sudden, it was like, bang! She went from I want to do hair, and her ultimate why was because people matter because they're made in the image of God.
Yeah,
that's what we're talking about. But a lot of people haven't actually sat down, rolled up their sleeves, sat in that brainstorming session for as long as it takes to really work that out. The flip side of that is, if and when you do take the time to do that, either as an individual or with a team or whatever, and you get down to some of those bedrock ideas, then your why becomes the thing that motivates you. It's that catalyst to get you going. It's the why that kind of guides you within certain guardrails, right? So you can, when you do those calibrations, you don't have to calibrate too far back because you never really got too far off. And the big one too, to me, is it sustains you, because we all have those valley moments where you had an idea, you were fired up, you're in the honeymoon phase, it's all going to be wonderful, and all the investors are going to come and realize how great your idea was, and they're just going to say, how much? Just tell me a number. It's a blank check. And then you discover, no, it's not, and you got to work harder at trying to convince people and all that. And you go, is it worth it?
Right.
And we've all had those moments. Is it worth it? Or am I ready to throw in the towel? And to me, when I've had those moments, and I've had more than my fair share of those valley moments where the clouds have kind of hovered over the top, and you ask, is it worth it? And I revisit my why, and I go, absolutely, it's worth it, because here's why I'm doing what I'm doing. This is why I was put on the planet. And if I can lead towards that, then guess what? That creates the legacy that will be described at my funeral.
Yeah, I love it. That's excellent. And to that point, the young lady that you mentioned, that's the kind of person I want cutting my hair.
Exactly. Exactly. That's the whole thing. If you've got a young person or whoever who is very clear about, here's why I'm doing what I'm doing, I absolutely want that person on my team.
That's right.
That's right.
Absolutely. This has been great. I so appreciate your time. Looking forward to going the next step, which is the where, and we're just going to keep unpacking these. So everybody stay tuned. We're just going to keep bringing these one at a time to you. Thanks so much. I appreciate it, Senator Crane.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Thanks for listening to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point Podcast. If you have comments or ideas for future episodes, please reach out using the contact page on our website, jdlevyassociates.com.